You know, when you stand in front of a massive, breathtaking building, maybe a centuries-old cathedral or a towering modern skyscraper, you naturally just marvel at what's visible right in front of you.
Right, the architecture.
Exactly. You look at the soaring glass, the intricate stonework, the grand archways, but you almost never look at the subterranean concrete, right? You don't think about the steel rebar that's buried deep inside the walls. You just assume the foundation is there, silently holding everything up.
And I mean, that is exactly by design. The foundation isn't meant to be the main attraction. Its entire purpose is to be invisible, bearing the weight so that the visible structure can safely reach those incredible heights.
Yeah. And the foundation we are looking at in today's deep dive belongs to one of the most, well, really beloved figures of the 20th century, Pope John XXIII.
Oh, absolutely.
But to truly understand the man who modernized the global Catholic Church, we have to dig up a 300-year-old administrative blueprint drafted by a Venetian nobleman who, and this is wild at one point, desperately wanted to quit society and live in a cave.
It is an incredible chain of events, and we are pulling from a really fascinating stack of sources today. We have historical analyses from the new liturgical movement, Catholic Exchange, and Faith ND,
Right.
and we are pairing those with some incredibly intimate excerpts from a published personal diary called Journal of a Soul.
Which is just a goldmine. So the mission for this deep dive is to explore this unexpected, century-spanning connection between two remarkable men. On one hand, we have St. Gregory Barbarigo, a 17th century diplomat turned bishop, and on the other, Pope John XXIII.
Right.
We are going to discover how the administrative brilliance of one man shaped the spiritual DNA of another centuries later. And along the way, we'll see what their shared story teaches you about leadership, humility, and the totally wild, unpredictable twists of historical legacy.
To really grasp this, you have to transport yourself back to the mid-1600s, right into the highest echelons of European power.
Set the scene for us.
So, Gregory Barbarigo was born in 1625 into a massively powerful Venetian noble family. And when we say powerful in 17th century Venice, we aren't just talking about having a lot of money.
Right. Venice was a supreme maritime and mercantile republic at this time.
Yeah.
It was a global player.
Exactly. His family tree boasted two doges, which, were the supreme leaders of the Venetian Republic, along with several senators. His father was actually a senator.
Wow.
So young Gregory is receiving a premier education, mathematics, philosophy, classical languages. He is basically being groomed from birth for the absolute highest levels of international politics.
And because he's this brilliant young student, he gets handed a major assignment right out of the gate. He becomes a diplomat, accompanying the Venetian ambassador to the historic negotiations for the Peace of Westphalia.
Which is huge.
Yeah, for those who might need a quick refresher on their European history,
Right.
the Peace of Westphalia is the series of treaties that ended the 30 Years' War. And that war was one of the most destructive conflicts in human history, just fundamentally tearing the Holy Roman Empire apart. The negotiations at Westphalia essentially created the modern concept of diplomacy and state sovereignty. They were literally drawing the borders of modern Europe.
And Barbarigo is right in the room where it happens. He is watching the most powerful men in Europe carve up territories, negotiate absolute power, and try to end decades of horrific bloodshed.
But instead of being intoxicated by that proximity to power, the sources indicate he experienced a profound, almost crushing disillusionment with the political world.
Yeah, he sees the ambition, the backroom deals, the sheer human greed required to manage empires.
He sees the sausage being made and he just wants out.
Yeah.
Completely out.
Yeah.
He actually decides he wants to abandon society entirely and go become a hermit in a cave.
Which is wild.
I mean, think about the magnitude of that pivot. It's like a rising star at the United Nations today. Someone who is on the absolute fast track to becoming the Secretary General, who suddenly decides to quit, throw his phone in a lake, and go live completely off the grid in a remote cabin.
It is a radical reaction to trauma and disillusionment. But this is where history hinges on a single conversation.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
During his diplomatic travels, Barbarigo had befriended a papal nuncio, essentially an ambassador for the Pope, named Archbishop Fabio Chigi. And when Barbarigo tells Chigi about this grand plan to become a hermit, Chigi forcefully shuts it down.
He tells him, no, the church doesn't need you in a cave. The church needs your mind.
Precisely. Chigi urges him to get his doctorate in civil and canon law, which is a highly prestigious degree known as the Laurea Utriesque, and to become a priest.
Okay, let's unpack this. Why push him toward law and the priesthood?
Well, he recognized that Barbarigo's background in high-stakes international diplomacy perfectly equipped him for church administration. His rejection of worldly politics wasn't a rejection of the actual skills he learned at Westphalia.
Right, the negotiation, organization, large-scale logistical planning.
Exactly. It was just an opportunity to redirect those exact same skills toward a higher purpose.
It's the classic mentor move, you
Yeah.
know? Like, I need you to go to law school so you can fix the system from the inside.
And Barbarigo actually listens to him. He gets the degrees, and he is ordained as a priest in his native Venice.
And the timing of this is crucial, right?
Very. The Catholic Church at this time was still dealing with the long aftermath of the Protestant Reformation. They had recently held the Council of Trent, which was essentially a massive emergency summit to clean up institutional corruption, clarify teachings, and fundamentally reform the clergy.
So they needed people who could actually execute these reforms.
Exactly. The church desperately needed competent, uncorrupt administrators to actually implement these reforms on the ground.
And his mentor, Archbishop Chigi, clearly knows this. Because shortly after Barbarigo is ordained, Chigi is elected pope, taking the name Alexander VII.
Talk about having a connection.
Right, and one of his first moves is to call his old friend Barbarigo to Rome to put him to work. So Barbarigo provides distinguished service to the papacy and is soon appointed Bishop of Bergamo and later elevated to Cardinal and Bishop of Padua.
Which is where he completely revolutionized what it meant to be a bishop.
How so?
Well, at the time, many bishoprics were treated like noble estates. Bishops often managed from afar, enjoying the wealth and status of the office in a comfortable city while leaving the actual rural parishes to uneducated, underpaid priests.
Just phoning it in.
Basically, yeah. But Barbarigo did the exact opposite. He took the reforms of the Council of Trent and turned them into a deeply personal, grueling administrative checklist.
The numbers from the new liturgical movement source are just staggering when you think about the logistics. In Bergamo, he personally visited all of the nearly 280 parishes in his diocese.
It's incredible.
And when he was transferred to Padua, he visited all 320 parishes in the 1600s.
Right? No paved highways.
Exactly. That isn't hopping in a car. That is travel by horse and carriage or on foot over rough mountainous terrain, staying terrible inns just to speak directly with the poorest people in his region.
And he wasn't just doing a quick meet and greet tour. He was enacting massive structural audits. He was aggressively expanding Catholic education.
What did that look like?
A major part of the Trent cleanup was something called catechesis, which basically just means getting back to basics and actually teaching everyday people what their faith means, rather than just going through the motions in Latin.
Okay.
To do that, Barbarigo completely reorganized and enlarged the seminaries to ensure priests were properly trained. He built libraries. He even set up a printing press to ensure standardized, high-quality educational materials were available to everyone.
Wow. He was universally referred to as a second St. Charles Borromeo, who was kind of the historical gold standard for reforming bishops.
Very much so.
But wait, I'm struggling to reconcile this, though. You're describing a guy who is obsessed with spreadsheets, printing presses, and systemic audits. He's building institutional infrastructure.
Right.
But our sources explicitly note his extreme personal charity, like the fact that he literally sold his own bed to get money to help the poor. Those are two completely different personality types.
Yeah.
How do you hyperfixate on bureaucracy without losing your humanity and becoming a cold, detached manager?
What's fascinating here is that this is the defining paradox of Barbarigo, but it totally resolves when you understand his core motivation.
Which was?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, for Barbarigo, administration was an act of love.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Reforming a seminary or setting up a printing press wasn't about enforcing rigid rules for the sake of power. It was about ensuring the poor actually got good teachers and competent pastors who wouldn't exploit them.
So the systems were just a way to care for people on a large scale.
Exactly. His massive structural changes were just the macro version of giving away his bed.
He left us a quote that captures this perfectly. He told his priests, "Be shepherds, not overlords. Be teachers, not judges. Be servants, not masters."
It completely flips the script on authority. And he literally worked himself to the bone implementing this vision until he died in 1697, leaving behind this incredible modernized infrastructure in Bergamo and Padua.
But the story doesn't end there.
Yeah.
In fact, his posthumous journey, his afterlife, really is a total roller coaster.
It is a bizarre timeline. Following his death, the people he served immediately start pushing for his canonization, basically the official process to declare him a saint.
Right.
In 1725, his body is exhumed and found remarkably preserved. In 1751, he is beatified by Pope Benedict XIV, which is the step right before sainthood.
And then momentum just vanishes.
Poof, gone.
Crickets. His cause completely stalls out for over 150 years. He's just stuck in the bureaucratic waiting room of sainthood.
Yep.
Until a 20th century superfan comes along. Enter Angelo Roncalli, the man who would eventually become Pope St. John X III.
Roncalli's connection to Barbarigo is deeply embedded in his own childhood and formation. Roncalli was ordained a priest in 1904 for the Diocese of Bergamo.
Barbarigo's old diocese.
Exactly. Roncalli was educated and spiritually formed in the exact same seminary system that Barbarigo had built and reorganized centuries earlier.
Right.
He was literally breathing the spiritual air Barbarigo had purified.
And Roncalli becomes obsessed with him. He views him as the ultimate model of a pastor. In 1911, Roncalli signs a formal petition to Pope Pius X to restart Barbarigo's canonization cause.
And it works. The cause resumes, but the Vatican moves at a glacial pace, so it still takes decades.
But then Roncalli himself is elected pope in 1958.
Right.
And what does he do? In May of 1960, he brings the cause to completion and officially canonizes St. Gregory Barbarigo.
He even puts him on the general universal calendar of the Church on June 17th, since June 18 was already taken by another saint.
It is a beautiful moment of historical symmetry. The student, centuries later, elevating the master who built the school.
It really is. But history is rarely that tidy, and church bureaucracy is notoriously complex.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because less than 9 years later, the ultimate twist happens. In the wake of Vatican II, which is the massive global council that Pope John XXIII himself called to modernize, the church-sweeping liturgical reforms are enacted.
Right.
And during those very reforms, Barbarigo is removed from the general calendar.
Yeah, the committee reviewing the calendar decided to trim down the number of universal feast days. The reasoning given for removing Barbarigo was that he was not of truly universal importance. I know. They basically considered him one Charles Borromeo too many, meaning they already had a reforming bishop on the calendar and didn't need another one, so he was relegated back to local, regional calendars.
Making him arguably the most rapidly degraded canonized saint in history. It is mind-boggling. It's exactly like a modern CEO aggressively lobbying for decades to get their personal hometown mentor into the Industry Hall of Fame, finally succeeding, only for the board of directors to quietly revoke the status a few years later using the exact rule book the CEO helped write.
The irony is extremely sharp. But, it raises a really profound question. Does losing that spot on the calendar actually diminish his legacy? Pope John XXIII was famously known as the patron saint of unintended consequences. Even though Barbarigo was removed from the universal calendar, his actual legacy didn't need a feast day to change the world.
Because his real legacy had already built the Pope who modernized the church.
Exactly.
And if you want to see exactly how this invisible foundation actually held up, you just have to look at Pope John XXIII's private diary.
This brings us to our final source, the Journal of a Soul. This book proves exactly how Barbarigo's 17th century seminary rules forged a 20th century global icon. Journal of a Soul is an incredibly rare historical document. It is a collection of Pope John XXIII's deeply private spiritual notes spanning almost 70 years.
70 years?
Yeah. It begins in 1895 when he is just a 14-year-old boy in the Bergamo Seminary, literally writing in a sheep penny copybook by the flickering light of an oil lamp. And he continues making these private entries until 1962, just before his death.
Reading the excerpts from the young Roncalli is fascinating. He writes, "I was a good boy, innocent, somewhat timid. I wanted to love God at all costs, and my one idea was to become a priest."
So sincere.
But what really stands out when you read these early pages is the suffocating intensity of the seminary rules he was living under. These were the institutional rules established by Barbarigo's reforms. We are talking about strict, formalistic daily schedules, intense, methodical examinations of conscience, where he had to mentally review every single action of his day.
The level of self-scrutiny is profound. He was making solemn vows to avoid even the slightest venial sins.
And for context, in Catholic theology, a venial sin is an everyday minor offense, like a small lie, a moment of impatience.
Right. It doesn't break your relationship with God entirely, but it weakens it. Young Roncalli was constantly fighting what he called the enemy within, which was his own self-love and pride. He imposed severe sacrifices on himself just to eliminate distractions during his prayer time.
I'm looking at this and thinking, a teenager under that much pressure is going to snap.
You'd think so.
It sounds like a recipe for creating a rigid, judgmental, puritanical adult. So what does this all mean? How does this hyper-strict, rule-following self-scrutiny produce a pope who is universally famous for being warm, funny, deeply accessible, and infinitely patient?
This raises an important question, and the answer is really about structure.
Wait, I'm trying to visualize this. It sounds almost like a trellis in a garden. The wood or metal of a trellis is incredibly rigid and unforgiving, but that exact rigidity is what allows a delicate vine to grow 10 feet high and bear fruit. Was Barbarigo's strict administrative system essentially the trellis for Roncalli's massive compassion?
That is a brilliant way to look at it. The rigorous framework, the technique, and the letter of the law instilled by Barbarigo's seminary system functioned exactly like a trellis. The structure itself is rigid and unmoving. But because it is secure, it gives the vine something to hold on to.
Wow.
Without that strict discipline of his youth, the Pope's massive ecumenical love for the world wouldn't have had the structural support it needed.
And when we say ecumenical, we mean a love that reached across boundaries, trying to unite different Christian denominations and engage with the entire modern world, right?
Exactly, a world-embracing charity. But without his foundational discipline, that expansive love would have collapsed under the immense political and spiritual pressures of the papacy. The journal shows us that his personal motto was obedientia et pax, obedience and peace.
The obedience to the structure created the internal peace.
Yes, and that internal peace allowed him to say later as Pope, "The whole world is my family. I have no longer any special ties in this life." He was completely accessible to everyone because he was completely secure in his foundation.
That's beautiful.
The journal reveals that as he grew older, the formal framework became less rigid in his daily life. The letter yielded to the spirit. He didn't need to consciously focus on the trellis anymore because the vine was fully grown and deeply rooted. But the trellis is what got him there.
It's incredible to trace the direct line from Barbarigo's administrative decisions in the 1600s, literally setting up printing presses and reorganizing schools, to the diary of a teenage boy in 1895, straight to the Pope who changed the global church in the 1960s.
It really emphasizes that history is not just a series of isolated events, but a continuous living chain of cause and effect.
So how do we actually apply this 17th century mindset today? We always want to ground this in your reality. Based on the insights from the Catholic Exchange piece, there are 3 highly practical ways to bring the legacy of Barbarigo and John XXIII into your own life right now.
First, support education at every level. Barbarigo opened schools and built libraries. You can support education in modern life without needing a massive budget. It can be as simple as mentoring a junior coworker, donating books to a local underfunded school, or just taking the time to patiently explain a complex topic to someone who genuinely wants to learn.
Second, be intensely present and approachable. Both of these men were legendary for their availability to everyday people. Make time for others without rushing them out the door. Return phone calls. Listen fully without checking your phone. In a world of endless distraction and constant optimization, giving someone your undivided attention is a profound act of charity.
Absolutely.
Right.
And third, make your core values visible in how you lead. Whether you are managing a corporate team, running a classroom, or leading a household, lead with consistency and integrity.
Yeah.
Barbarigo proved that strong administration and deep care are not mutually exclusive. If you build systems that actually serve people, your bureaucracy becomes an act of love.
They're 2 sides of the same coin. Which brings us to our final thought for you to ponder today. We started this deep dive by talking about the unseen foundations of a skyscraper. We've seen how a 17th century bishop's seemingly dry administrative choices to reform local seminaries ended up quietly forging the mind of a 20th century pope who changed the world.
The unseen impact.
Exactly. So consider your own life. What long-term, completely unseen impacts might your daily organizational choices, your standard operating procedures, or your small acts of mentorship be having on the generations that will follow you long after you are gone? You might just be building the trellis for a harvest you will never even see.